Back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 25th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's presidential campaign. And over the past couple of months, and more recently in the past few weeks too, we have started to see Donald Trump's campaign really decrease in terms of the political maneuvering skill and political strategy skill that we saw displayed in the 2016 and arguably even in 2020 in those presidential elections. And the reason why we point this out is because the 2024 race as it stands to be a race for Donald Trump to lose. He leads in all of the battleground states, and the no toss-up map here on Real Clear Politics shows Donald Trump winning more electoral votes than he won by in 2016, and more electoral votes than Joe Biden won by in 2020. And so if this map was to hold true and hold through November, it would be a monumental victory for President Trump. A rematch that was always meant to be Donald Trump coming back, the second president since Grover Cleveland, the second president in United States history, to win an election after losing their initial re-election bid, and it would be quite significant, one that Donald Trump and the Republican Party would be quite proud of. But it becomes increasingly more difficult to see how they maintain such a lead as they've started to really delve into different types of political maneuvering over the past couple of weeks that really strike me as alarming. Comments that are being made in safe democratic states, choices being made potentially for vice president, the style of campaigning, and the ideas that Donald Trump has been putting out on the side of his campaign, floating the idea of certain types of restrictions and bans across the country, floating the idea of different types of campaigning to minority voters, leaning into stereotypes, leaning into stigmatized topics. I mean, a bunch of different things out here that I think have really come to make me question who is at the top of this campaign and why are they running it in a way that sure might be at face value working correctly, but in the event that things go awry would not be strong enough to bring the Donald Trump campaign back on track. Donald Trump is at a point in time where I think him and his closest circle very much does believe that he's on track to win the election, that this is an election that he's going to easily pretty much landslide Joe Biden in, but in reality, that is not going to be the case. And I think that type of thinking has caused Donald Trump to extend beyond the immediate importance of the political circle that Joe Biden and the Democrats have really been focusing on. States like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, we've started to see Donald Trump not only focus on those states, but also spend time, resources, money in other states that he has no chance of winning, yet declaring that he has every chance of winning them. Most recently, he visited the Bronx, where he made a decision to bring two rappers on stage who actually have pending criminal charges, have pending, criminal cases that could very well throw their lives, into a complete, train wreck, but also are not something that a presidential campaign really should be associated with. You see here that the rappers that he brought on stage last night in the Bronx are accused in a gang murder plot. It's something that you really do not see at all as a positive thing for any campaign, for any person, quite frankly. And for Donald Trump and his campaign to not even run them through a vet, or maybe ran them through a vet, they found like this was something that didn't matter, that wasn't going to be of importance when it came down to bringing people on stage in the Bronx. It really calls into question who was making these calls, who was making these decisions, and why in the world did they allow this to happen? We also found that when he visited the Bronx, he received immediate criticism for those he brought on stage, saying that some of his remarks, some of his comments, his new sneaker line, all of this was done in an effort, according to members of the Republicans, that this was done in an effort to win over minority voters and specifically black voters. But he has received heavy criticism for the fact that a lot of that is rooted in stereotypes, arguably racist stereotypes, associating black members, black men specifically, with sneakers, with crime, things that, any Democratic campaign, at least for the most part, would look at and say, this is not the way you campaign to minority voters, not at all the way they have historically campaigned to minority voters. But Republicans, in a way, are trying to reach a group that they have never really reached before, and yet they are doing it so poorly. You make decisions like these and you say, we're going to win different groups of the electorate that we've never won before, when those groups of the electorate are saying, what in the world are you doing? He received pushback from local people in the area because where he was holding this rally should have brought in a much more diverse crowd than what actually ended up being there. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, quite frankly, minority voters are not Republican voters. They're not the Republican base, and they're not voters that will get out and vote for Donald Trump in this coming November election. And so when he makes this appeal here, what is supposedly an appeal, a lot of it comes across as disingenuous, in some cases even offensive at the way that Donald Trump does maneuver, politics in different minority groups. And so I think that has really become a problem for the Trump campaign. The people they're associating with, the people that they're trying, not the people that they're just associating with, but also the way they're trying to appeal to minority groups. A lot of it genuinely does come across as something that just simply isn't being actually done by anybody outside of his immediate campaign. He's not receiving outside advice, outside guidance on what looks right or wrong, what looks strong or not in a different community than he's used to, than Republicans arguably are used to. And so I find it to be very interesting that this is now at the helm of the Trump campaign, that this is their effort to move into minority communities, to move into regions of the country like the Bronx, like New York City, that you never see them move into before. But it wasn't just New York City that Donald Trump has been visiting, and I think on its own might not be the worst thing in the world that Donald Trump is trying to, campaign in different spaces. But I do think there is limited time. And I think with said limited time, you focus on the battleground states like the Biden campaign is doing, but equally, there is no reason to hold a rally in the Bronx. It speaks to a greater sense, a cognitive dissonance that the Trump campaign has been displaying over the past couple of weeks, not only in New York, but also in states like New Jersey, where Donald Trump declares we're going to win New Jersey, declares that his campaign will spend money and make an effort to win supposedly what they view as a battleground state, in reality is a safe Democratic state. It isn't just New Jersey that he said he'd win. He also said there's a very good chance he'll win New York. We know that's not true. This Bronx rally displayed that there was some level of difference here that Donald Trump is displaying that really makes no sense. He's not winning New Jersey. He's not winning New York. And it isn't just there, too. He says here he's going to win Virginia. He says here he's going to win Minnesota. Minnesota went to Biden by nearly 8 points. Virginia went to Biden by over 10 points. New York went to Biden by nearly 25 points. And New Jersey went to Biden by over 15 points. And so when I look at these states, I really, 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 really do not think that the Trump campaign is going to win here. And the fact is, he still wants to campaign in them. He still wants to campaign and is campaigning in New York, still wants to campaign and is campaigning in New Jersey, is going to campaign in Virginia, is going to campaign in Minnesota, predicting he's going to win in all 4 of the states. If that was to happen, I mean, you'd be looking at an electoral map. If we were to take, where he's currently leading in the polls, let's go ahead and characterize those states. Let's get to the point where, we have the Trump states here. You find that it really does make Donald Trump look very strong if that's a reality. But we know that's not going to be the case. I mean, it is very fascinating that he does believe genuinely, at least maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, maybe he's just saying it for the audience there, but, there's certainly parts of him that it makes sense that he would think that. Where he is right now, I think this is the map based on the polls, but he's saying he's going to win Virginia. He's going to win Minnesota. He's going to win other states too. I mean, you're talking about him campaigning in New York and New Jersey. These are states that in no reality are going to go red, and yet he's predicting that he's going to win them. These types of comments and this type of effort into states that are already locked down for the Democratic Party really makes no movement. This isn't some type of 4D chess move where he's campaigning in New Jersey in the hope that Pennsylvanians will go over and listen to him, that he's campaigning in the Bronx in the hopes that I don't know who, because New England is safe blue and so is New Jersey and so is New York. I mean, none of it really makes sense. And sure, people are writing this off. It's a one-off rally. It's a one-off rally. It probably isn't. And based on what we've seen too, based on the efforts from the Trump campaign and based on their internal monologue that continuously gets leaked where they talk about how Trump believes he's going to win this state, he genuinely thinks he's going to win this election in a landslide. I mean, that type of thinking is the exact same complacency that arguably lost Hillary Clinton the 2016 presidential election. Arguably was probably one of the worst things that the Clinton campaign could have done, which was the idea that it was going to be a steamroll election. And the polls were wrong. They were wrong in a way that they could have been wrong in 2022 and were wrong in 2022. I mean, this is such a, interesting position for the Trump campaign to be in, because for the first time ever in their history of any of their candidacies, 2016 or 2020, they genuinely, the polls predicted that they were on track for victory. They have never been at this point. And clearly, they don't know how to react to it. Clinton's campaign was to believe the polls, trust the polls, and look to expand an electoral map to have a mandate. The Biden campaign trusted the polls to an extent, but never underestimated Donald Trump. Put the pressure on Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I mean, it was clear that Biden was leading, but the Biden campaign was campaigning like they were 10 points down. The Trump campaign is campaigning like they're 10 points up. Even in some of their decisions too. I mean, it isn't just who he's bringing on stage in the Bronx or the decisions he's being, making in all of these battleground states and the declarative statements that he's making. it's also who he's choosing to run this campaign alongside with him. I talked about it today about how Tom Cotton I thought was probably going to be a very horrible choice for Donald Trump, probably at the bottom of the barrel here if I was to pick out anyone for him to run with. Not even someone I would consider if it was in my top 10. And so for Tom Cotton to be here as a strong contender, some sources even say up there in the top 3, potentially even number 1 on the list, I really question. Is this the same type of thinking that resulted in Donald Trump going to all of these safe blue states, campaigning in all of these safe blue states and saying, I'm going to win them? Is this the same type of thinking that will now result potentially in a lackluster VP choice? I don't know, but it probably is. And it's certainly not where the Trump campaign really should be going into the prime season of the election. It's very interesting. The Trump campaign, too, also recently has now released a video, which they have since taken down, that referenced a unified Reich. Something that is a directly, direct connection point between Nazi Germany. I mean, these are things you do not touch. These are things you vet extremely well. You watch the ads over and over and over. And the problem is, all of the Trump campaign's response to this was they were not going to initially take the video down. They said a staffer didn't see that the word Reich was used in the newspaper. And then it was further understood that these newspaper articles that were being put up in the ad as, on-screen visual effect also included some custom text. And so people weren't believing that they didn't see it. People were believing that this was intentionally added in. I mean, it was all these different ways people were taking it. The point is, nobody took it positively. Nobody took away from this and said, this was a strong ad. And so eventually, the ad that was being used by Donald Trump that mentioned a unified Reich was meant to be a very positive thing for Donald Trump, eventually turned into a scandal. But how in the world does one of the most prominent political figures in the entire world release an ad as poor as this one? Release an ad that should have gone through the eyes of 10, 20, 30 people before it made it between the initial drafting to the eventual publishing stage. It was so bad, so bad, that I think it really does not do anything good for Donald Trump and in fact contributes to this overall narrative here that the Trump campaign does not have the political instincts that it once did, does not have the strength and the ideas here to make it through the general election, even if they are up today. Because I will tell you this, mark my words, if these numbers change, and I think they genuinely will, if these numbers change, this is not a campaign that can sustain this level of incompetency. This is not a campaign that can just go ahead and flail their arms and say, this is a campaign we're going to win, and it doesn't matter what we do, yada, yada, yada. You get mad, we don't care, we're going to win, because that's not how it's going to work. This is not a campaign that can move without error. This is a campaign that has almost exclusively moved with error over the past couple of weeks, and it seems to be a consistent problem. And while Joe Biden may not be the most popular political figure either, there could very well be a reckoning point where Joe Biden wins back the base, wins back minority voters, wins back black voters in Michigan, Arab American voters in Michigan and Minnesota, wins back different demographic groups across the country, wins in the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, go back to blue. What happens then? What happens when Donald Trump's campaign needs to be working at 110% and simply the people that he's surrounding himself with and he has hired just can't even put up to 80%? This should be a much more easily winnable election based on where President Biden's numbers are, based on where he is amongst young voters, based on where he is amongst minority groups. He is performing the worst out of any Democrat in the 21st century amongst minority groups, according to polls. And yet Donald Trump is still only ahead in certain groups, in certain states here. In fact, all of the swing states by a narrower margin than what it should be. President Biden is so unpopular, the likes of which we didn't see with Obama. We didn't see even with any other president that been able to win as a Democrat, and yet he still stands a very, very strong chance at victory because Donald Trump is not running the campaign to the best of his ability. Joe Biden may not be either, but the problem is that Donald Trump will have no wiggle room as the months go on. The Biden campaign needs to win back their base to win the election. Donald Trump is relying on the base not turning out because the campaign isn't doing enough to win back independent voters. Independent voters are in fact swaying back towards Biden. We can see it in some recent numbers that we'll talk about in tomorrow's video. We'll talk about it too because it matters. Because it goes to show that if Donald Trump starts to lose ground amongst these different groups of voters, there could be no rebound. It could be at a point of no return as early as late September or early October because the campaign doesn't have the infrastructure, doesn't have the political instincts, doesn't have those smart enough with political maneuvering that they could in fact win the election. And so that's a problem. And I think we've started to see it really top heavy with Donald Trump, but also by his closest circle, by people that will not tell him he is wrong about certain things, will not go against what he decides to say, how he decides to say it. And, all of that is really a bad place to be. Because while I do absolutely think that Donald Trump holds the advantage today, it's not going to be a long-lasting advantage. I think Joe Biden is going to perform better than what the polls actually suggest. And there is no room for error. And based on some of the decisions that Donald Trump is making, whether it is leaning into incredibly offensive and inappropriate stereotypes for minority voters, whether it is choosing the wrong VP nominee and popularizing people who should not even be in consideration, or going to safe blue states, wasting money, wasting time, wasting resources, and saying you're going to win there, and saying that and declaring that to your supporters. I mean, all of this is a stunt, and it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be this all of a sudden resurgence of Trump in traditional Democratic states. All it is going to result potentially in his failure this coming November, because the campaign simply can't get their act together. The problem starts at the top, but it very, very clearly does trickle down. And nobody is willing to tell Donald Trump that he's making the wrong choice, that he's saying the wrong things, that his campaign should not be bringing in the people that they are bringing in. They should not be publishing the ads that they are publishing. And so while there are so many people that this blame could be split across and really tallied up and allocated, whatever that might be, the problem lies within the campaign and at the top. So my question is, how do you fix this? I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if there is a solution. The Trump campaign has benefited from the fact that young voters and minority voters are less enthusiastic about this election than 2020 and arguably even 2016. But that is the only way the Trump campaign is winning. And should that change, Donald Trump will have no room to stand, no room to win. Because this campaign, as of right now, is Donald Trump's to lose. But Joe Biden can very, very, very much win back more of the electorate, get back into the position where he is leading nationwide and statewide, once he brings in back those groups of voters that have been Democratic voters for decades. He needs his base. Trump is at his limit. And so it's all downhill for Donald Trump if Joe Biden starts to make improvements. His campaign is entirely reliant on a failed Democratic campaign. And that may not happen. And that would be a problem for Donald Trump. But we will see what happens. I'm interested to see how something like this pans out over the coming, next coming months, how it pans out through the fall, through the election. A lot of different things are going to be at play here. And it isn't just going to be how Trump runs his campaign, but also how Biden runs his campaign. And so a lot of this really will matter. If Biden gets his A game on, his campaign starts really churning out more support, really turning that base back towards the Democratic Party. Because if they can do that, Donald Trump more than likely will lose the 2024 election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen is a video you can watch, and then a playlist for 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.